The GPS tracker brought me to the edge of a forest off of Route 65. Only idiots steal bikes, so I'd expected the thief that stolen mine to be some inbred redneck in a trailer park. I figured that could still have been the case, and maybe the guy ditched the bike when he saw it had a GPS tracker. Blaring his horn a few times as goodbye, the trucker that dropped me off pulled back onto the highway and was gone. The GPS screen I held said my bike was a few hundred feet into the forest, but as I stared at the oak and elm trees in front of me, I started regretting coming alone. I should have called a few of the citizens from my club to tag along, but it was too late for that now, so I hopped the guardrail and entered the forest. Despite the fact I was wearing my jacket and it was the middle of spring, it felt cold. The crescent moon barely provided any light. I pulled out my cell phone and used the flashlight to see, but I still stumbled over branches and roots every once in a while. When less than 100 feet were between me and my bike, the air grew humid and started to fester with the smell of rotting fish. There was no breeze, but the tree branches creaked every few seconds. It was almost as if the trees were alive, and they were breathing their stinking breath in my face. As I continued on, my heart started to beat a lot faster, and I saw something that almost made me turn back. Strung up by their own intestines were dozens of dead animals, but who or whatever had strung them up hadn't just cut out the intestines and tied them around the animals' necks. Instead, the entire animals had been flipped inside out. Apparently their whole bodies had been pushed up through their mouths, and then the intestines were tied around the trees. Some of the hunks of flesh were the size of dogs, others the size of opossums, but it was hard to verify what any one of the creatures actually were. Some of them were fresh, still dripping red blood and brown bile. Others were old, and any liquid that had stayed on the flesh was now black and dry. As I discovered the hanging animals, the humidity got thicker, and the sound of the creaking tree branches sped up a little, as if the trees were excited that I'd discovered their secret. I almost turned back at the sight of the malevolent menagerie, and the only thing that stopped me was the distant rev of my bike's engine. It lasted for about 5 seconds before stopping. A few seconds later, it sounded off again, and again lasted for about 5 seconds. The GPS tracker indicated the bike was stationary. I wanted to call the cops, but when I looked at my phone, it said I had no bars. I picked up a baseball bat-sized stick, positioning it so that I could hold it and my phone. I swallowed hard and pushed deeper, avoiding the dangling, dripping bodies as I went. I noticed there weren't many flies. I wondered if even they were too afraid to come to this place. The closer I got to the bike, the less I needed the GPS, so I put it in my jacket pocket. When I was less than 30 feet away, I could also hear a squishing sound accompanying the revving engine. I slowed my steps to try and be as quiet as I could, and my mind raced with what to do when I confronted the thief. If they were crazy enough to string up dozens of animals by their guts, they were absolutely crazy enough to kill me. My only option was to take them by surprise, with a hard blow to the back of the head. I made it to the clearing where my bike was laying on the ground, and froze. But I didn't freeze because I was caught. I froze because the thief wasn't what I had expected. The thief was facing me, but it didn't seem to care that I was there. The thief was almost human, but nothing was quite right. It had arms and legs, but they were too thin, and knees and elbows that were too circular. His fingers were long and slender as well. His head had relatively normal features, but the mouth had no lips, just 2 rows of blunt teeth, dappled with brown and black dots. His bulging eyes were focused on a squirming cat that it was holding down with one hand next to my bike's rear wheel. The creature's other hand was on the throttle. I forced my eyes to look around, but my body remained petrified. The trees around the clearing were all splattered with blood. The remnants of other dead animals lay on the ground around the trees. It was as if the creature was painting. The roar of the engine echoed through the trees, and the cat was ground to mush. This blood spattered on me and I jumped, shivering and whimpering, but still otherwise unable to move. While keeping the rest of its body still, the creature's eyes jerked to me. It was then I realized the rhythmic creaking sound of the branches was in sync with the creature's breathing. Slowly rising to its full height, the creature never stopped staring at me. It dropped the remaining bits of the cat and the throttle, and it looped its long fingers around my waist. It felt like tree branches were being wrapped around me. It opened its mouth wide, as if it meant to swallow my head, so I held up my arms and hands to protect myself. The flashlight blinded the creature and it dropped me. I landed on my butt and was on my feet in an instant. I ran as fast as I could in the direction I'd come, eventually breaking through the line of trees and stumbling back onto the highway. I tried to catch my breath and quiet my racing heart as I scanned the trees for any sign of movement. I saw nothing, but continued to hear the rhythmic creak of the tree branches, and it sent icy fingers down my spine. Unsure of what else to do, I started walking down the highway in the direction I hoped would take me home. After a few minutes of walking, a pair of headlights appeared down the highway and I sprinted towards them, waving my hands above my head to flag down the old Chevy. It screeched to a stop when it spotted me. I opened the passenger side door and hopped in, buckling my seatbelt. "Gee, mister, you got blood all over you. Everything okay?" the driver said in a slow, unsettling tone. "I'm fine, but there's some sort of monster in the forest. Take me to a police station," I replied, taking a breath every few words. The driver chuckled and continued driving. We sped past where I had been and took the next exit. Taking a right turn, the driver headed down the road. We passed a sign for the sheriff's office, but the driver kept going. "You sure you know where you're going?" I said, wondering if there was more than one station. "Oh, sure, but I don't think you should go to the police station. They'll just think you're crazy," the driver said, still talking in a slow, unsettling way. "You see, it sounds like you've gone and had an encounter with Molly." My heart started pounding. Now, I wouldn't say Molly's my friend, but me and her got somewhat of a mutual understanding, and I understand she doesn't like it when people run from her. On the other hand, when Molly lets you go, you aren't scared a bit. I can testify to that. She opens your eyes to things you've never seen before. But when you run from Molly, you get scared. And you, sir, are scared. I cocked back a fist, but before I could drive it forward, I felt a sharp, inconsistent pain. I looked down and saw the stun gun for a second before slipping out of consciousness.